The scream shattered everything. Every fork froze. Every conversation died. "They're hitting my mommy! Please, you have to make them stop! They won't stop hurting her!" A small black girl stood in the center of the Gilded Crane's dining room, her chest heaving. Her yellow sundress was soaked dark with grease and blood that wasn't hers. Her braided hair had been torn half loose. One of her sneakers was missing. And her tiny fingers, covered in her mother's blood, were gripping a $5,000 suit sleeve. The sleeve belonged to Hanjun Park. The Americans called him a real estate developer. The Koreans called him Cheol-yong, the Iron Dragon. 51 years old, 6 feet of controlled violence in a charcoal Tom Ford suit. The truth about him lived somewhere between the balance sheets and the bodies that disappeared into the Delaware River. He didn't look up immediately. He never did. The wagyu on his plate was still bleeding, the scent of seared fat mixing now with something sharper, metallic, desperate. The child's blood. He set down his knife with surgical precision, the kind of movement that made grown men flinch. And then he looked at her. Imani Jenkins was 8 years old, though she wouldn't tell him that for another 20 minutes. What she would tell him, in a voice cracking with terror, would rewrite every rule he'd spent 3 decades enforcing. "Sir, they're at the shop. The Hollow Boys. They said Mama didn't pay enough." Hanjun's lieutenants moved instantly. Hands disappeared beneath jackets, reaching for weapons. Their boss had just been touched by a stranger, by a child, in public. This was disrespect. Hanjun raised one finger. The room understood. The hands reappeared empty. The men sat back down. But something in Hanjun's chest, something that had been frozen solid since 1994, cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Imperceptible to anyone watching, devastating to the man feeling it. He studied the blood on his cuff. Type O positive, if he had to guess. Fresh, still wet. The girl's mother, a woman he'd never met, was dying 4 blocks away, and her daughter had outrun 3 gang enforcers to find the one man in Philadelphia who could stop it. Why him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why would a child instinctively run toward the most dangerous man in the city? Hanjun stood. No announcement. No explanation. His men knew better than to ask. 30 years of loyalty had taught them that when the Iron Dragon moved in silence, someone was about to learn a lesson written in blood. The black Mercedes sedan was already idling outside. It always was. Deho, his right hand, opened the rear door. Imani climbed in without hesitation, her small body folding into leather seats still warm from the heater. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She'd used up all her tears in the 4-block sprint. Hanjun slid in beside her, and the door closed with the muted thunk of German engineering, the kind of sound that said, "What happens in here stays in here." But before we continue, please like the video and subscribe. I put a lot of effort into this video, and it hurts when people watch and don't subscribe. It means a lot to me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The car pulled into Philadelphia's Tuesday night traffic, blending seamlessly into the river of headlights and brake lights flowing down Broad Street. The SEPTA train rattled overhead, metal grinding on metal, drowning out the sound of Imani's shallow breathing. This wasn't how Hanjun Park spent his Tuesday evenings. 30 years ago, his Tuesdays had been different. He'd been a husband, a father to a 5-year-old girl who loved yellow dresses and drew pictures of dragons. Then the fire came. Not an accident, arson. Rivals in Seoul who wanted to send a message. They'd sent it. His wife burned trying to shield their daughter. His daughter burned calling for him. He'd arrived 6 minutes too late. 6 minutes. He'd rebuilt himself in America. Brick by brick, contract by contract, body by body, he learned that mercy was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. That emotion was a weakness rivals exploited. That the only way to survive was to become something that couldn't be killed because it had already died. The Gilded Crane had been his sanctuary for a decade. Every Tuesday at 8 p.m., Booth 7, Wagyu cooked rare, Mandarin and Korean whispers negotiating territory and tribute. He was the arbiter, the final word. The man who kept the underworld's chaos from spilling into civilian streets. He didn't do charity. He didn't do mercy. He certainly didn't do rescue missions for strangers. And yet, "She fixed all your shirts," Imani whispered from beside him, her voice barely audible over the engine's purr. "Mama, she works for the dry cleaner on Girard. She stayed up all night last week fixing the collar on your blue one, said it had to be perfect." Hanjun's jaw tightened. The blue shirt. He remembered. The stitching had been flawless, hand done, not machine. He'd noticed because he noticed everything. It was the difference between life and death in his world. The overlooked detail, the loose thread. He'd been wearing the labor of a woman who was now being beaten to death for refusing to pay protection money. Protection money he was supposed to guarantee she'd never need. His neutral zone, the 6-block radius around his properties, where small businesses operated untouched, had been compromised. The Hollow Boys, a reckless crew of 20-somethings playing gangster with their father's guns. He'd heard whispers they were operating in his territory, but he'd assumed his captains had handled it. Assumption. The first sin of empire. Daeho's voice crackled through the intercom. Boss, Jenkins Tailor Shop, Gerard, and 8th. 3 hostiles reported, 1 civilian down. Hanjun checked his watch, 9:47 p.m. Amani's small hand found his again, squeezing once. Her palm was sticky with her mother's blood. You're him, right? She asked, looking up with eyes far too old for 8. The dragon everyone's scared of? He didn't answer. Mama said you're not really a monster. She said monsters don't tip the homeless lady outside your building every morning. Hanjun's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered. Recognition, maybe, or regret. The sedan accelerated. Hanjun stood. No announcement, no explanation. His men knew better than to ask. But as the black sedan's engine roared to life, one question burned in every mind at that table. Why would the Iron Dragon risk everything for a child he'd never met? The answer was bleeding out 4 blocks away. The tires screeched as Daeho took a hard left onto Gerard. In the rearview mirror, Hanjun's face was stone, but his hand, still stained with Amani's mother's blood, curled slowly into a fist. She stayed up all night for you, Amani whispered again, her voice breaking. And for the first time in 30 years, Hanjun Park allowed himself to feel something other than control. Rage. The human body can survive massive trauma for approximately 60 minutes. Doctors call it the golden hour. The window between injury and irreversible damage. Between life and the point where no amount of skill or prayer can bring someone back. For Camille Jenkins, that clock had started ticking the moment the first fist connected with her ribs. 9:47 p.m. That's when they'd left the Gilded Crane. Daeho already had 3 addresses pulled up on the dashboard screen. Every property the Hollow Boys used as a safe house. Every location where they might be holding a woman who'd refused to pay street tax. His fingers moved across the tablet with surgical efficiency, cross-referencing police scanner reports and the network of informants who fed the Iron Dragon information in exchange for breathing privileges. The Mercedes roared south down Broad Street, weaving through Tuesday night traffic. Outside, Philadelphia's humidity clung to everything, thick, suffocating, the kind of heat that made violence feel inevitable. Inside, the air conditioning blasted Arctic cold. Amani sat rigid in the back seat, clutching something Hanjun hadn't noticed before. A sewing kit. Small, fabric-covered, the edges worn soft from years of use. Her mother's. She must have grabbed it before running. Her tiny fingers kept opening and closing the metal clasp. Click, click, click. The only sound louder than the engine. Traffic thickened as they hit Girard Avenue. Red lights stretched ahead like a chain. Then the obstacle. A SEPTA bus, belching diesel exhaust, blocking both lanes as passengers shuffled on and off with the urgency of people who had nowhere important to be. Hanjun's jaw tightened. Every second wasted was blood Camille couldn't afford to lose. Get us through. 2 words. That's all Daeho needed. The sedan mounted the curb with a lurch, tires squealing as they carved through the bike lane. Pedestrians scattered. Someone's coffee exploded across the windshield. Daeho didn't slow. The speedometer climbed, 40, 50, 60 in a 25 zone. Police sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, but they weren't for him. They were never for him. 9:58 p.m., 11 minutes into the golden hour. Jenkins Tailor Shop materialized on the corner of Girard and 8th, or what was left of it. The front window had been shattered inward, shards of glass glittering under the streetlights like scattered diamonds. The door hung sideways on one hinge, and inside, visible even from the street, the mannequins had been decapitated. Their heads lay scattered across the floor like a warning. This is what happens when you don't pay. Hanjun was out of the car before it fully stopped. The smell hit him immediately, gasoline mixed with torn fabric and something metallic underneath. Blood, though not enough to suggest a body. Not yet. Amani bolted past him, her small frame slipping through the broken doorframe. Mama! Mama! Her voice echoed through the destroyed shop. No answer. Just the creak of ruined floorboards and the distant hum of traffic. Hanjun stepped inside. Glass crunched under his Italian leather shoes. The interior had been systematically destroyed. Not in rage, but as theater. The cutting tables overturned. Bolts of fabric slashed and strewn like entrails. Sewing machines thrown through the drywall. And on the floor, near the overturned register, a pair of reading glasses. The left lens cracked clean through. Camille's. She's not here. Imani's scream came from the back room. She's not here. Hanjun followed her voice. The back room, what should have been Camille's workspace, was empty. The cutting table lay on its side, but the chair was still warm. They'd been here recently, within the last 30 minutes. The cash register had been left open deliberately. A message. And inside, pinned with a sewing needle through blood-smeared receipt paper, pay the tax or the lady gets buried. No signature, no amount, just the threat. Hanjun pulled the note free, studying the handwriting. Sloppy, rushed, the handwriting of someone who'd never had to write their own ransom demands before. Amateurs playing at organized crime. Behind him, Imani had collapsed into a pile of torn fabric scraps, remnants of what used to be wedding dresses, judging by the white lace. Her small body shook with sobs that had no sound anymore. She'd run out of tears. Now there was just the shaking. The man who hadn't bent his knee in a decade crouched in the debris beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. He simply waited, the way predators wait, absolutely still, letting the world move around him. Then he saw it. A completed order hanging on the rack near the back wall. One of his shirts. Navy blue, Egyptian cotton, the collar so perfectly tailored it had made his other shirts look cheap by comparison. He'd worn it to a meeting with a state senator 2 weeks ago. Hanjun lifted the hanger, examining the stitching at the collar. Hand done. Every stitch uniform, precise, invisible, unless you knew where to look. The kind of work that took hours under a lamp, with eyes that refused to quit until perfection was achieved. Camille Jenkins had stayed up late, probably past midnight, to make sure his collar sat exactly right. And he'd paid the dry cleaner $40 for the service, never knowing the woman doing the real work was being extorted for hundreds. He had been wearing the labor of her late nights. She'd kept him sharp while he kept her unprotected. His phone vibrated. Minseok, one of his captains. Hanjun answered without speaking. Boss, the Hollow Boys aren't authorized in your neutral zone, but if you move on them, the Northside crew sees it as expansion. They'll push back. We're looking at a potential 6-month turf war. Bodies in the street. Police crackdowns. Is one woman worth that? Silence. Hanjun's silence was an answer in itself, but Minseok had never learned to read it correctly. Boss? Hanjun ended the call. He was calculating the cost. One woman's life versus a potential 6-month turf war versus police heat versus the fragile peace he'd spent a decade negotiating. The math was simple. Camille Jenkins wasn't worth it. No single civilian ever was. But math didn't account for the girl sobbing into torn wedding dresses. Math didn't account for the perfect stitching on a shirt collar. Math didn't account for the fact that 30 years ago, his daughter had worn a yellow dress just like Imani's. Come on, he said quietly, offering his hand. We're not done. 10:15 p.m. 28 minutes into the golden hour. 32 minutes left. They were loading Imani back into the sedan when the windshield exploded. The bullet punched through the glass and buried itself in the headrest, exactly where Hanjun's skull had been 3 seconds earlier. Daeho moved on instinct, throwing Imani to the floor and covering her body with his own. Hanjun didn't flinch. He simply turned, scanning the rooftops with the calm of a man who'd survived 17 assassination attempts. There, third building, east corner, the glint of a scope catching streetlight, not the Hollow Boys. They didn't have the patience for sniper work. This was someone else, a rival syndicate watching his movements, wondering why the Iron Dragon was suddenly playing hero for a seamstress. They think I've gone soft, Hanjun said to Daeho, his voice flat. Let them believe it. The sedan's engine roared to life. Daeho pulled away from the curb, tires smoking, weaving evasively. More glass rained down on the leather interior, mixing with Imani's terrified breathing and the smell of gasoline still clinging to Hanjun's suit. While broken glass rained down on the sedan's leather interior, Hanjun made a choice that would cost him either his empire or his soul. He reached for his phone, not to call reinforcements, not to negotiate. He called the one man who knew where bodies disappeared in Philadelphia. The phone rang twice. A voice answered, distorted, mechanical, like gravel scraped across steel. Han, the Hollow Boys leader, you need to know who he really is. Hanjun's blood ran colder than it had in 30 years. The contact name on his screen read, The Mortician. The Mortician's voice crackled through the phone's speaker, distorted but deliberate. Min-seok has been taking kickbacks from the Hollow Boys for 8 months. Every business in your neutral zone, he's been bleeding them dry and splitting the take. Hanjun's knuckles whitened around the phone. Betrayal wasn't new in his world. It was expected, accounted for, occasionally even rewarded if executed with sufficient skill. But this was different. This was rot in the foundation. Location? Hanjun's voice was ice. Abandoned shipyard off Delaware Avenue, Port Richmond. They've been using it as a collection point. The Mortician paused, the kind of pause that preceded bad news. But Han, there's something else. Their leader goes by Scully, real name, Jinwoo Choi. The sedan swerved slightly. Daeho's hand had jerked on the wheel, imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him. But Hanjun knew him, and Daeho had been there in Seoul. He understood what that name meant. You're certain? Fingerprints from a bottle they left at the Jenkins shop. I ran them through our Korean contacts. It's him, Hyun-sik's youngest son. The line went dead. Seoul, South Korea. The Gangnam district before it became a tourist destination, when it was still a battlefield divided by men with knives and ambition. Hyun-sik Choi had been a rival syndicate boss, old school, brutal, the kind of man who believed power came from fear, not strategy. He'd wanted Hanjun's territory. Hanjun had refused, so Hyun-sik had sent a message that couldn't be misinterpreted. Fire. The kind set with gasoline and malice, designed not just to destroy, but to erase. Hanjun's apartment building had gone up at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. By the time he arrived, 6 minutes, always 6 minutes, the 4th floor was an inferno. His wife had tried to shield their daughter in the bathroom. The investigators found them together, his daughter's small hand still clutching the yellow dress she'd insisted on sleeping with. She was 5 years old. Her name had been Sumin. Hyun-sik had died in prison 3 years later, shanked in the shower by an inmate who owed Hanjun a favor. But Hyun-sik had children, 4 sons. Hanjun had tracked 3 of them, dealt with them the way predators deal with threats. But the youngest, Jinwoo, had been only 12 years old. A child. And Hanjun, despite everything, had left children alone. Jinwoo was Hyun-sik's youngest son, 12 years old when his father died in prison. Now, 30 years later, the bloodline had followed Hanjun across an ocean. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens next is the kind of justice the algorithm doesn't want you to see. Click that button before this gets buried. 10:34 p.m., 47 minutes into the golden hour, 13 minutes left. Hanjun pulled up a photo on his phone, one of the few he'd allowed himself to keep. Sumin in her yellow dress, standing in a playground, laughing at something off camera. The dress had white flowers embroidered on the hem. In the back seat, Amani had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by terror. Her yellow sundress was torn at the shoulder, the fabric stained dark. The pattern was different, but the color, that exact shade of yellow, was identical. Boss, Daeho said carefully, do we wait for the full crew? I can have 12 men at the shipyard in 20 minutes. Hanjun stared at the photo for 3 more seconds. Then he locked the phone. No, we go now. Just us. He wasn't saving Camille anymore. He was trying to save the man he'd buried with his daughter 3 decades ago. The man who'd believed in protecting the innocent. The man who died in a fire that couldn't be stopped. Daeho's tablet beeped. Boss, I hacked Min-seok's encrypted files during the drive. You need to see this. He projected the screen onto the dashboard. A spreadsheet appeared, meticulously organized, damning. Every protection payment that should have gone to Hanjun's organization had been rerouted to the Hollow Boys. Jenkins Tailor Shop, $1,200 month for 8 months. Total $9,600. 14 other businesses, a Korean grocery, a Dominican barbershop, a halal butcher. Family operations where children did homework behind counters while their parents worked 16-hour days. Bled dry. Daeho opened another file. Text messages. Camille's number appeared repeatedly, each message more desperate than the last. Please, I have a daughter. I'll pay double next month. I can sell my car. Just give me 1 more week. She's 8 years old. Please. Min-seok's responses. Read receipts. No replies. Amani stirred in the back seat, her eyes opening. Is Mama already in heaven? Hanjun turned to face her directly. His voice, when it came, was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her. Not if I have anything to say about it. PM. Daeho had pulled up a medical app running calculations. If she's bleeding internally, broken ribs, ruptured spleen, she's got maybe 20 minutes. Not 60, 20. The sedan accelerated south on I-95. Port Richmond emerged from the darkness like a graveyard for industry. The abandoned shipyard sprawled across 12 acres of cracked concrete and rust. Razor wire topped the fences, though most had fallen away, leaving jagged metal teeth pointing at nothing. The smell hit them first, rotting fish from the Delaware River mixed with diesel fuel and industrial decay. The kind of smell that came from places where things went to die and were never found. Rusted cargo containers were stacked 4 high, arranged like crypts in a metal necropolis. Industrial fans echoed with a rhythmic whump-whump that sounded like a failing heartbeat. Seagulls screamed overhead in the darkness, and in the center, a single flickering light in a warehouse window. There, Daeho said, killing the headlights. The sedan rolled to a stop 300 yards out. Hanjun checked his watch, 10:51 p.m., 9 minutes left in the golden hour. He stepped out. The night air was thick, humid, carrying the smell of the river and rust and violence about to happen. Daeho popped the trunk, pulled out 2 suppressed Glocks and a tactical vest. Hanjun took the gun, checked the chamber. 17 rounds. Enough. But as he slid the Glock into his waistband, he realized the clock wasn't counting down to Camille's death. It was counting down to Jinwoo's. Amani's car door opened. No, Daeho said sharply, moving to block her. You stay. But she'd already slipped past him, catching up to Hanjun at the fence line, her tiny hand wrapped around his. She looked up at him, her eyes far older than they should be. You're going to kill people, aren't you? Not hurt, not stop. Kill. 8 years old, and she already understood the currency of her neighborhood. Hanjun didn't answer. He could have lied, could have softened it with the language adults use to protect children from truth. But Amani Jenkins had earned honesty, even if it came wrapped in silence. His hand tightened around hers once, a single squeeze, then he gently pulled free. Daeho, keep her in the car. Lock the doors. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, take her to the safe house on Passyunk. Amani resisted, digging her sneakers into the gravel. Please don't be like them. Mama says you're different. Hanjun turned away, his coat swallowing him into the shadows between the cargo containers. What he did next would either make him a monster or a martyr. Hanjun moved through the shipyard like a ghost. His breath was steady, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the rhythm his Shiram master had drilled into him 40 years ago in Seoul. Control the breath, control the heartbeat, control the heartbeat, control the fear. His footsteps made no sound on the wet concrete, each placement deliberate, weight distributed across the ball of his foot before committing to the full step. 30 yards ahead, a hollow boy leaned against a cargo container, scrolling through his phone. The blue glow lit his face, young, maybe 22, the kind of age where invincibility felt like birthright. Hanjun closed the distance in 8 seconds. The suppressed Glock stayed holstered. No need for noise. His hand found the pressure point behind the kid's ear, one precise strike, and the body went limp. He lowered it silently to the ground, zip-tied the wrists, and kept moving. 2 more patrols eliminated the same way. Efficient, clinical, the old training asserting itself like muscle memory. On the east side of the compound, Daeho was doing the same, flanking, neutralizing, clearing a path. They'd done this before. Busan, Manila, Detroit. The cities changed. The choreography didn't. Only 11% of you are subscribed. That means 89% are watching for free while I risk demonetization for this story. Fix that right now. Back at the sedan, Imani pressed her face against the cracked window. Daeho had told her to stay, told her to lock the doors. But he'd left the tactical binoculars on the passenger seat, an oversight born from decades of working with professionals who followed orders. Imani was 8 years old. Following orders wasn't in her vocabulary when her mother was dying. She lifted the binoculars, heavy in her small hands, and scanned the warehouse windows. The view bounced, unfocused, until she found it. The central room, lit by a single industrial lamp. Her mother. Camille Jenkins hung suspended over a rusted industrial vat, her hands zip-tied above her head, connected to a pulley system. Her head lolled forward, unconscious or worse. Below her, the vat bubbled with something dark and chemical, waste from decades of shipbuilding, left to rot and corrode. "Mama," Amani whispered, her breath fogging the glass. She didn't think. Thinking was for people who had options. She opened the car door and ran. The bravest thing you can do isn't fighting when you're strong. It's running toward danger when you're small. Hanjun rounded a corner between two containers and walked straight into an ambush. The Hollow Boys' lieutenant, a man called Razor for reasons that became immediately apparent, stepped out with a knife already drawn. 8 inches of serrated steel, the kind designed not to kill quickly, but to make death memorable. The old man bleeds just like anyone else. Razor lunged, the blade aimed for Hanjun's throat. But Hanjun had been fighting men with knives since before Razor was born. He sidestepped, grabbed the wrist, and executed a classic Sarum hip throw. Razor's body hit the concrete with a wet crack. Ribs, probably 3 of them. Hanjun's knee found Razor's chest, pinning him. The knife skittered away into darkness. "Where is Jinwoo?" His voice was arctic. Razor spat blood, laughing through broken teeth. "You're too late, old man? She's already in the water." Hanjun sprinted to the location Razor had indicated, the northwest vat room. His lungs burned. The golden hour was long expired. If Camille was in the water, if she drowned in chemical waste, he kicked open the door. A figure hung suspended over the vat. Camille's coat, Camille's build. Hanjun ran forward, and the cage dropped from the ceiling. Steel bars crashed down around where he'd been standing half a second earlier. He'd rolled on instinct, the bars missing him by inches. A trap. Razor had been the bait. The figure over the vat spun slowly in the light. A mannequin, dressed in Camille's coat. Hanjun moved deeper into the container maze, fury replacing the surgical precision that had carried him this far. He found the locked shipping container by following the sound, weak, rhythmic banging from inside. He shot the padlock off, wrenched the doors open. A teenage girl collapsed forward into his arms. 16, maybe 17. Zip-tied, unconscious, severely dehydrated based on her cracked lips and sunken eyes. And on her forearm, a fresh brand. The Hollow Boys gang symbol, burned into her skin. Jinwoo wasn't just shaking down businesses. He was conscripting children from the families who couldn't pay. Hanjun found her phone in her pocket. Cracked screen, battery at 4%. The last text, sent 3 days ago. They said if I don't work for them, they'll take my little brother next. He cut her restraints, propped her against the container wall where she'd be visible, and pulled out his phone. "Daeho, when this is over, find her family. Full relocation package. The girl never saw my face." He looked at her one more time. This child who'd been turned into collateral, into leverage, into property. The surgical precision was gone now, replaced by something older and darker. Something he'd buried in 1994, but never truly killed. 11:02 p.m. The golden hour had expired 7 minutes ago. But there were still 5 minutes left if Camille was strong, if she was fighting. This wasn't just about Camille anymore. The Hollow Boys had turned his neutral zone into a hunting ground for children. Every second he wasted, another family was being destroyed. Before Hanjun could radio Daho the coordinates, a scream shattered his focus. High-pitched, terrified, unmistakable. "Let me go! Mama!" Imani, Hanjun's head snapped toward the main warehouse. Through the gaps between containers, he saw them. 3 Hollow Boys dragging a small figure in a torn yellow dress through the entrance. 30 years ago, he'd heard his daughter scream in the fire. He couldn't reach her then. History would not repeat. Gunfire erupted on the west side, Daeho's diversion. Flashbangs lit the night in strobing white. Half the gang peeled away from the warehouse, running toward the noise. "Boss, I've got this." Daeho's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Get to the girl." 11:07 p.m. Camille Jenkins was now living on borrowed time, and Hanjun was about to make the Hollow Boys pay interest. The warehouse doors stood 20 feet tall, wrapped in chains thick enough to moor a ship. Hanjun didn't look for a key. He grabbed a fire axe from the emergency box mounted on the wall and swung. Once. The chains sparked. Twice. They shattered, links exploding across the concrete in a shower of rust and metal. The doors swung open. Inside, Jinwoo Choi stood in the center of the room, 38 years old, face tattoos. Designer streetwear worth more than most people's cars. 15 Hollow Boys surrounded him in a semicircle. Amani knelt at his feet, a knife pressed to her throat, tears streaming down her face. And suspended above the central vat 20 feet in the air, Camille Jenkins, unconscious, the pulley system creaking as chemical waste bubbled below. Jinwoo smiled, slow and cruel. Welcome to the family reunion, Uncle Han. The warehouse interior stretched 40 feet to the rusted catwalks above, a cathedral of industrial decay. The air was thick with humidity and the acrid smell of chemical waste. Decades of paint thinner, battery acid, and solvents left to ferment in the vat at the room's center. Camille Jenkins hung 20 feet above that vat, zip-tied to a pulley system that creaked with every slight movement. Her head lolled forward, unconscious. Blood had dried on her temple where they'd struck her. Below, the chemical waste bubbled lazily, releasing vapor that would burn lungs and dissolve skin. Amani knelt 10 feet from the vat's edge, 2 hollow boys gripping her arms, a third pressing a knife to her throat. Her yellow dress was torn at the sleeve. She'd stopped crying. Now there was only the shallow breathing of a child, calculating whether screaming would make the blade press harder. Jinwoo, Scully, Choi stood center stage, backlit by industrial lamps. Late 30s, face tattoos crawling up his neck like vines, traditional Korean characters mixed with American gang symbology. His designer streetwear probably cost $6,000. Blood money, worn like a trophy. 15 hollow boys surrounded the perimeter, weapons drawn, AR-15s, Glocks. One kid with a sawed-off shotgun he clearly didn't know how to hold properly. Hanjun stepped through the shattered doors, fire axe still in his left hand, and the room went silent except for the industrial fans echoing overhead and the drip, drip, drip of condensation from rusted pipes. "You killed my father," Jinwoo said, his voice carrying the theatrical quality of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Took me 16 years to find you." Hanjun dropped the axe. It clanged against concrete, the sound reverberating. "Your father murdered my family," he said flatly. "We're even." Jinwoo laughed, genuine, delighted. "Even? Nah, Uncle Han. You took my inheritance, my father's empire, my birthright." He gestured to Amani and Camille. "I'm taking theirs." Jinwoo didn't just want revenge. He wanted Hanjun to feel helpless again. Wanted him to watch another daughter die, another mother fail to protect her child. Wanted to author the exact same horror across 3 decades in an ocean. "Trade," Jinwoo said, spreading his arms magnanimously. "Your life for both of theirs. Kneel, and I'll let them walk." 15 guns cocked in unison. The sound was mechanical, final. Hanjun calculated. 15 shooters, various skill levels. 2 hostages in immediate danger. Daeho still pinned outside by the diversion crew. The pulley system 20 feet up, controlled by a manual crank near the east wall. Jinwoo positioned between him and the crank. Amani's eyes found his across the warehouse floor. Her mouth moved, silent, forming a single word: don't. 8 years old, and she understood that trading one life for another didn't guarantee anything. That men like Jinwoo didn't honor deals. That sacrifice without strategy was just dying for free. But she didn't know Hanjun had never intended to die here. He raised his hand slowly, dropped the Glock from his waistband. It clattered to the floor. Sweat ran down his spine. The warehouse was stifling, the industrial fans doing nothing but circulating hot, chemical-thick air. "You want me," Hanjun said, taking a step forward. "The woman is nothing to you." Jinwoo's grin widened. Finally, the Iron Dragon bows. Hanjun walked forward. 5 steps, 10. Each movement deliberate, hands visible, posture submissive. Then he knelt, but this wasn't surrender. It was calculated distance. Jinwoo approached, pulling a nickel-plated .45 from his waistband. His father's gun, probably. The kind of symbolic murder that felt poetic to small minds. He pressed the barrel against Hanjun's forehead, savoring the moment. "Any last words?" Hanjun's eyes flicked up. "Just one. Duck." The east door exploded inward, Daeho's flashbang. Blinding white light, deafening percussion. And in that half second of disorientation, Hanjun moved. Shiram close quarters technique, grab the wrist, redirect the barrel, strike the elbow joint, pivot the hip. 3 seconds. Jinwoo's gun spun across the floor, and Hanjun had him in a chokehold. "I didn't bow," Hanjun said into Jinwoo's ear. "I reloaded." The hollow boys opened fire, panic shooting, no discipline. Bullets sprayed wildly. Hanjun used Jinwoo as a human shield, dragging him backward toward the pulley crank. 2 rounds hit Jinwoo's shoulder, a third grazed his thigh. Gang members were hitting their own leader in the chaos. Daeho breached fully, suppressive fire from his AR-15, driving half the hollow boys into cover. The kid with the sawed-off shotgun fired at the ceiling and knocked himself backward with the recoil. Hanjun reached the pulley crank, slammed Jinwoo's face into it, and grabbed the wheel. He spun it counterclockwise. Clank, 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 stopping Camille's descent exactly 1 foot above the vat. The chemical vapor was already blistering her exposed skin, but she was alive. Unconscious, but alive. Move and she drops, Hanjun shouted, his forearm across Jinwoo's throat. The gunfire stopped. Hollow Boys froze mid-reload. Daeho held position at the east door, weapon trained on the largest cluster. Daeho, the girl, Hanjun said quietly. Daeho moved like smoke, disarming the 2 gang members holding Imani with strikes so fast they didn't register until they were already on the ground. He scooped Imani up, carried her to the north corner, away from the vat. Now, Hanjun said, pulling a folded document from his inner jacket pocket with his free hand. Sign this, Jinwoo spat blood. What? Asset transfer. Your cryptocurrency wallets. Your 2 properties in Fishtown. All of it. Hanjun pressed the pen into Jinwoo's hand. Beneficiary, Imani Jenkins Education Trust and Neighborhood Reparations Fund. The room was silent except for the industrial fans and Camille's shallow breathing overhead. You're not gonna kill me? Jinwoo's voice cracked, disbelief mixing with rage. Your father stole my daughter's future, Hanjun said. You'll pay for hers. He forced the pen down. Jinwoo signed, sloppy, blood-smeared, legally binding. 6-figure cryptocurrency assets. 2 properties worth $300,000 combined. Every dollar the Hollow Boys had extracted from the neighborhood returned with interest. Daeho, lower her. Slowly. Daeho reached the pulley crank on the opposite wall, began lowering Camille. The unconscious woman descended inch by inch until she was 5 feet above the ground. Daeho caught her, cut the zip ties, laid her gently on the concrete away from the vat's edge. Imani broke free from the corner and ran. Her small body collided with her mother's larger one, shaking her. Mama! Mama! Wake up, please! Camille's eyes fluttered, opened, focused on the small face above her. Baby. Her voice was barely a whisper. You're so brave. Imani collapsed onto her mother's chest, sobbing. Camille's arms, weak and shaking, wrapped around her daughter. For 30 years, Hanjun Park had forbidden himself this sight. A daughter embracing her mother. The universe hadn't erased his loss, but it had given him a chance to prevent another. He watched from 10 feet away, still holding Jinwoo in a chokehold. And for the first time in 30 years, a single tear tracked down Hanjun's face. He released Jinwoo, let him collapse to the floor. Then Hanjun removed his Tom Ford suit jacket, the one with Camille's perfect hand stitching, and walked to where Imani knelt. He draped it over her shaking shoulders. The jacket swallowed her small frame. Look at me, Hanjun said quietly. Imani looked up, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Your mama is going to see you grow up, I promise. She released her mother just long enough to wrap her arms around Hanjun's leg, the kind of hug children give when words aren't big enough. Thank you, Mr. Dragon. Hanjun's hand rested briefly on her head. Then he returned to Jinwoo, zip-tied him to a pipe, and pulled out his phone. Anonymous tip to the FBI. Hollow Boys trafficking stolen electronics across state lines. They'll find enough evidence here to put you away for 20 years. He crouched beside Jinwoo's bleeding form. Your father died in prison. You will too. But you'll live long enough to regret every second you made that child cry. Ambulances arrived at 11:34 p.m. Camille Jenkins was rushed to Temple University Hospital with 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a concussion. But she was alive. The Hollow Boys were dismantled by sunrise. 12 arrested, 3 hospitalized, 2 fled the state. Min Seok, the traitor, was never seen again. Rumors said his body fed the Delaware River, but no one asked Hanjun directly. And for the first time in 3 decades, Hanjun Park slept without nightmares. But in Philadelphia, peace never lasts. 6 months later, a black SUV idled outside Imani's elementary school. The driver watched through tinted windows as children spilled onto the playground during recess. He lifted a camera, took 3 photos of the girl in the yellow dress. Then he made a phone call. They should have learned. You don't touch the Iron Dragon's family. Spring arrived in Philadelphia 6 months later, painting the city in cherry blossoms and second chances. Jenkins' tailor shop stood on the corner of Girard and 8th, but it wasn't the same building Imani had fled from that humid Tuesday night. The exterior gleamed with fresh hunter green paint. A new awning stretched across the storefront, gold lettering spelling out, Jenkins and Park Tailoring. Inside, the smell of lavender fabric softener mixed with the clean scent of new drywall. Industrial sewing machines hummed their rhythmic meditation, whir, click, while light jazz played from a Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Billie Holiday's voice wrapped around the space like expensive silk. Camille Jenkins stood beside her primary cutting table, fitting Hanjun Park for a charcoal three-piece suit. Her hands moved with absolute steadiness, pinning the sleeve where it needed to taper. The scars on her forearms had faded to thin silver lines. Her posture was confident, her movements precise. She'd survived, and survival had made her stronger. "You know, you're my only client who tips 300%, she said, adjusting the jacket's shoulder seam. Hanjun stood perfectly still, arms slightly extended. "You're the only tailor who survived meeting me." The corner of Camille's mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Some jokes carried truth too heavy for laughter. In the corner where storage boxes used to be stacked, a small desk had been installed. Imani, now 9 years old, her hair in fresh braids tied with yellow ribbons, sat doing homework. The essay prompt, written at the top of her paper, read, "My hero." She'd filled 3 pages already, her handwriting careful and deliberate. She looked up when Hanjun glanced her direction. "I finished the drawing," she announced, holding up a piece of construction paper. The image showed a large dragon, wings spread, protective, standing over a small flower. The dragon was drawn in black and silver. The flower was bright yellow. "Miss Rodriguez says I should write about a real person, not a cartoon dragon," Imani said, her tone suggesting this was a problem with Miss Rodriguez's imagination, not her essay. "But I told her you're real." For the first time in 30 years, Hanjun Park smiled. Not the calculated expression he wore during negotiations, but something genuine. Brief, almost invisible, but there. "Frame it," he said quietly. Imani beamed. Hanjun's empire still stood. The Iron Dragon still controlled the tri-state underworld with the same efficiency that had made him legendary. But his ledger had a new column now. Protected families. 14 businesses on that block paid him nothing. Instead, he paid them. Insurance packages, private security patrols, college scholarship funds for their children. The Korean grocery store that used to get shaken down monthly now had a panic button that connected directly to Daeho's phone. The Dominican barbershop had new chairs and bulletproof windows. The halal butcher's son was pre-enrolled at Temple University with a full ride. The community had transformed. Murals covered buildings that used to be tagged with gang symbols. Streetlights that had been dark for years now worked. Crime had dropped 64%, according to the police reports Hanjun's people monitored. The brass bell above the shop door chimed. Daeho entered, carrying 2 boba teas, 1 mango, 1 taro. Their weekly ritual. He handed the mango to Imani without a word. She accepted it like the treasure it was. "Homework before sugar," Camille said from across the room, not looking up from Hanjun's sleeve. "Yes, Mama," Imani replied, but she was already sipping through the straw. Daeho approached Hanjun while Camille stepped away to grab her pincushion. "The other syndicates are calling you weak," Daeho said quietly. "Say you've lost your edge." Hanjun adjusted his collar, watching his reflection in the full-length mirror. Let them come test that theory. He hadn't gone soft. He'd simply recalibrated the definition of strength. Any man could destroy. It took something else entirely to build, to protect, to become the wall between violence and the people who deserved peace. 20 minutes later, Hanjun stepped out onto the sidewalk. The afternoon sun was warm, the spring air carrying the smell of fresh paint from a mural being completed 2 buildings down. He checked his phone. Messages from 3 captains, 2 lawyers, 1 very nervous city councilman. Then a text from an unknown number. "You think one act of mercy erases the past? We're coming for the girl next." An attachment loaded, a photo of Imani leaving school yesterday, her yellow backpack slung over one shoulder, smiling at something off camera. Hanjun's jaw tightened. His thumb hovered over the screen, already composing the orders that would turn Philadelphia inside out until he found whoever sent this. But first, he looked back at the shop window. Through the glass, he could see Imani showing her mother the drawing. Camille's hands, the same hands that had stitched his shirts through late nights, now rested on her daughter's shoulders. Both of them laughing at something only they understood. Hanjun turned to face forward, looking directly ahead with the cold certainty of a man who'd already won wars that hadn't started yet. "Let them try," he whispered. The Iron Dragon had learned to love again, and there is nothing more dangerous than a man with something to protect. I'd really appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I put a lot of effort into this, and it honestly hurts when people watch and don't subscribe. Thank you for your support.